Hi, I'm Randy Taylor, and I'm here today with Jason Kraus, who's a very fascinating guy. He happens to be not only an author, but a past deputy sheriff. He's worked with counseling of kids that were underprivileged, and I just think you're going to find his story amazing. Jason, I'm thrilled to be here, but frankly, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is you've written this book that's totally unique and that it's different. It's called Late Bird. Could you tell me how you came about the motivation to start with this?
Absolutely. In 2012, the last presidential election, a few months before, I started telling everybody in my life, it's kind of setting up to make sure that someone would hold me accountable, that if things don't change, if this election doesn't go the way it's supposed to go, that I'm going to do everything I can to make a difference in America, to show a better way. And for me personally, the election didn't go very well. Okay, what I call the re-election of a nightmare happened, and so I sat down. It took about a week, and I remember that week specifically. That when I went around to different people that I knew, businesses and clients and friends, and we talked to each other, it was almost a depression that had set in. It was almost like people said, "This is just the way it's going to be. This is it. America's a mess. It's going to be a mess. We're in debt. We have dysfunction everywhere. We have people fighting. It's just the way it's going to be." And it took about a week, week and a half before I finally sat there and said, okay, I said I'll do everything I can. What are you going to do? So I started blogging. I wrote some interesting blogs, and then people liked it, but there was all of 12 of them that liked it, and the message wasn't getting out. So I jumped on Facebook and started going in there, and it was working okay. But the reality of it is to make a difference, you have to have people who can hear your message.
And how are you doing that now?
Well, and so what I did was I sat down and wrote my book. I wrote my story. And so I wrote Late Bird. And I talked about how I grew up in America, the things that I experienced in America. And I did it in a story version of to show a better way, to specifically explain systemic changes that we have to make in America. Not do or we hope to make, but we have to make sure that the next generation, and frankly, honestly, right now, the current generation that's getting into retirement, if we don't make some of these changes, they will suffer.
Well, my understanding is that you actually have a movement planned on this, that basically you're already getting some feedback. Could you share a story with me that we talked about earlier?
Sure. After Late Bird was written and it went out and it was published, people could read it, it went across America. Facebook is a powerful tool, and so I shot it out there. There was one particular couple in particular, a woman. I was on Facebook one night answering to people. So people were reading it and enjoying it and coming back to me and saying, "Hey, this is great. Can you do this?" And I said, "Absolutely, we can do this." It's up to as I say in the book, it's up to the big fella upstairs and the American voter. And so a woman jumped on to the little conversation I was having and said, "Well, this sounds great. I'm gonna read your book." So she actually downloaded it in the next 5 minutes, and in the process, while I was still talking to other people, started reading the book. So she kept popping in her comments were, "This is the best thing I've ever read." So she finished it. She went to her husband and gave it to him. He read it, and he sent me a really long email, which I won't get into the whole thing, but one of the premises of that, he says, "My wife has only read 2 books in her entire adult life. 2. One of them is the Bible, and the other one is your book called Late Bird." And he said, "I read it. I believe. I'm in. What do you need?" And so over the last couple of months, they've actually purchased almost 50 books themselves and have given it away to friends and family members. And that's actually moved on to where other people have contacted me that have read it. They're giving away books. And so we do have a movement here. It's about America. It's about freedom.
Okay, that's interesting, Jason. And by the way, I couldn't help but notice this amazing cover. Could you give me a little background on this? Is this you?
Most people do think it is, but actually it isn't. It's my nephew. My nephew when he was 6 years old.
Interesting. Now you told me also that you had a background working with abused kids. Now how does that come into the book?
Well, when I was a kid, fortunately for me, I say this all the time. The greatest thing that can happen to any child is to be born in the United States of America.
Okay.
And the second greatest thing is that you can have 2 loving parents, in that order. Because you can have loving parents from all over the world. If you're born someplace that doesn't have freedom, it doesn't matter if your parents love you. Things are going to be rough.
Okay.
So, for me personally, once through my experiences of dealing with bullies and going through the way that I was raised, when I was in college, I decided I have a psychology degree, so I wanted to work with children. I like making a difference in their lives, and so I did that for quite a while. And the progression, natural progression, at least for me, is to move into law enforcement. And so a job became available. I applied, I was hired, and I ended up working as a sheriff's deputy in a local county jail.
Okay.
And that's where life got really interesting. So for me, I'd never had any experience with law enforcement other than positive ones.
Mm-hmm.
Nice to see you, how you doing? You know, like parades and everything's great because I'm a rule follower and I follow the law.
Mm-hmm.
But working inside the jail, I experienced, well, I experienced the criminals, of course. I experienced more behavior from an abusive perspective from the people that were locked down that I've ever wanted to experience in my life. And then, of course, I also came across politics.
Okay.
And that is all explained in there. It was a very intense, powerful time in my life where I learned specifically that they're actually, growing up, I always knew there was right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But working in the jail, I experienced good and evil.
Now, how did you come up with the title Late Bird?
Late Bird was, I was born in Southern California, and so back in the 70s, when we went to school, they broke us up into groups. So they tested us, and then they labeled us. And so if you didn't do very well on your test, they called you an early bird, and they made you come to school early. And if you did score very well, they called you a late bird, and when you came to school, they kicked you out onto the playground. Now, of course, for me, that wasn't that big a deal because I was being labeled as one of the smart kids. But when the early birds would come out to play, they were being beaten up by the late birds.
Kidding.
They were being, back then the word was retarded. And so they'd come out to the playground, and the kids, the bullies that were the supposed, not all of them, but some of the smarter ones. And so that's how, for me, most of my life, 99% of the fights I've ever been in were defending other people. And so it was something I hated because when the early birds would come back, when they'd come out to the playground just to play, just to be children, they were being beaten up and abused just because a teacher had labeled them. A teacher had called them stupid.
And children could be cruel.
So are adults.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless they have good role models.
Well,
giving the right advice.
That's why we're here.
Now, I understand you also had a situation where you got involved with Chick-fil-A. Could you tell me how that came about?
Chick-fil-A, and again, I write about this in the book, was an experience where it was a few years ago, and the process came out where I believe it was the CEO of Chick-fil-A decided to give his personal opinion on marriage, whether it was appropriate for a man and a woman or a man and a man. I don't personally care. It doesn't really matter to me. I'm not here for the social issues perspective. Everybody, it's a free country. As long as you're taking care of yourself, you're not hurting yourself or others, live your life. Okay.
I agree.
But in this particular perspective, he was giving a private opinion. It got shot all over the news and everybody talked about it, and that's great. And I personally didn't care. However, when the mayors, many mayors across America decided that they were going to punish Chick-fil-A, okay, that is oppression. Freedom of speech specifically talks about the right from persecution or prosecution from our government, not from you or me. If you say something I don't like, I can disagree and we can have a problem about it, okay, or not. But with government has a specific role to keep everybody safe, to enforce the law. So when you tell private enterprise, which is funding everything, that because he has a personal view, he can't come do business in your city, that's a direct violation of the First Amendment, freedom of speech. So there was a cause that went out across for people, for a lot of people there for different reasons. Some people are for traditional marriage. Some people are totally against gay marriage. That's not why I was there. I drove over there. I went to the bank and pulled out a certain amount of money and went over and it was about 100 degrees out. It was hot. And I walked. The people were lined, because the line, there was probably 500-600 people. This was in Roseville, California. And I went up to each person and I said, and I write about this in the book, and I said, why are you here? And so they looked at me and I said, can you tell me why you're here? And so they started explaining it to me. And I said, okay, so you're here for freedom of speech. And they said, yes, I am. And so I gave them a $20 bill. I said, well, allow me to buy your meal. And so I did that for about a half an hour until I ran out of money for the people who specifically said they were there for freedom of speech.
Interesting. Rather than a free lunch, there's no free lunch.
There is no
freedom
free
of
lunch.
speech. So then that kind of relates to the fact that you really have a movement going where the idea is that the individual has to do something on their own to affect change. Am I right on that?
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, I think on that happy note we can end, but the point is, this is an amazing book. It's based on Jason's life. He also has experience that really adds a lot to the book. He was a deputy sheriff. He's worked with abused children. He's a business owner, and I don't think you want to miss this. Jason, I want to thank you personally for taking your time to come here, and by the way, especially for being so candid, talking about items from your personal life. I think this book, Late Bird, is a must-have.
A must-have.
It is a must-have. I think it's something that would help parents and children alike. And I think your points in there and the fact that we're heading towards a movement of trying to get people to affect social change one at a time has real merit.